Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us today for this morning's sutta study with Ayya Soma. So Ayya Soma will be sharing with us a sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. And if you'd like to follow along, you can click the link posted in the live chat. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them in, and I will read them for Ayya Soma at the end. So good morning so far to Gita, Nancy, Alexandra, Ayya Vimalanyani. Good to see you, Venerable. Hello as well to Jens, Michael, and Adine, and Denise, and Kyle. And good morning as well to our friends joining in on Instagram Live. So at this time, I'll pass things over to Ayya Soma for this morning's Dhamma talk.
Thank you, Bhante Sumanam, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. So we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. So this morning we will be reading from Anguttara Nikaya 8.10, the sutta called Trash. Very amusing title. So the sutta begins. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Champa on a bank of the Gagara lotus pond. Now on that occasion, bhikkhus were reproving a bhikkhu for an offense. When being reproved, the bhikkhu answered evasively, diverted the discussion to an irrelevant subject, and displayed anger, hatred, and resentment. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus. Bhikkhus, eject this person. Bhikkhus, eject this person. This person should be banished. Why should another's son vex you? Very powerful beginning of the sutta, with already a sort of sudden, unexpected, perhaps, reaction from the part of the Buddha, or so we think. But let's analyze a little bit in detail. So we see that there's a setup, like in a monastic community, where there is a monk that has committed an offense. And most likely this offense was on the more serious side. So it was probably not, taking something that was not allowable, for example. Or as in like not perhaps orange juice not strained 3 times. Or 5 times, according to all the different traditions of these days, but rather something that had some clear moral connotation. So the monks went to this monk, pointed out that an offense had been committed, and this monk, when he was being reproved, when he was being admonished, he started answering evasively, diverting the discussion to an irrelevant subject, as we've seen, and then also displaying anger, hatred, and resentment. And so in the Buddhist discipline, actually, the Buddha talks about when one is fit to talk and when one is not fit to talk. And one is not fit to talk if they do not lend an ear, for example, or they're not open to changing their views, or they come to the conversation with pride, with an intent to, quarrel, or perhaps, wanting to see some sort of defeat in whoever they're speaking with. But in the, in the practice of Dhamma, Vinaya, whether we're actually a lay person or a monastic, but even more so when we're a monastic and we take certain vows and we're fully committed, actually the process of admonishment is something that we really need to look forward to, because that is growth in this Dhamma and discipline, as the Buddha says. Actually, in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says, a discussion among the good is for the sake of knowledge and confidence. So whenever other spiritual companions point out our flaws or our misdeeds, we should be really happy. Like, oh, great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to pierce my delusion. For shedding light on this particular aspect that I was oblivious about. Right? That's why it's so important to live with spiritual friends. So if one admonished is not listening to the admonishment, not taking into consideration what is being said, well, that is a big obstacle for the practice not only of the individual, but the practice of the community at large. So every single person who is involved in the community. And if we're talking about a grave offense, then even more so, right? And so the Buddha actually gives a lot of instructions out of compassion on how to both give admonishment correctly. So when we think there is something that needs to be said, then we wait for the right time. We try to say it gently. We make sure that it's beneficial. We make sure that our mind is full of loving kindness, not full of hatred. Sometimes we can get irritated by other people's defilements, right? It's very common. I don't hate you, but I really hate your kilesas. Your defilements are really annoying. So we need to make sure that our mind is in a sort of good state before we go and address. And then, of course, asking if what we're about to say is true, or if we're, just imagining it. So in this circumstance, we see that obviously, since the Buddha didn't address the part concerning the admonishment, all of these requisites had been fulfilled. But then the instructions of how to receive admonishment, those are not fulfilled. And so it's actually a very beautiful teaching. We used to chant it every morning, actually, how to give and how to receive admonishment. We haven't done it in a while, but we should actually probably refresh it. It's always good. Because that happens a lot in community, right? It's a sort of day-to-day occurrence on how to give and how to receive. And it's kind of cute because actually the instructions of how to give admonishment are pretty brief. But how to receive admonishment, the Buddha has a lot to say. I remember the first time I read that, I read those instructions, I started laughing because it was kind of like going to a therapist for like 10 years, but all concentrated in 1 second. But in brief, it's actually what the Buddha addresses, or what is described here in this sutta. So, answering evasively. So like starting like, oh yeah, I don't know. What have I done? What is it? Not really actually saying, yeah, I've killed that sentient being, for example, or I've lied or whatever. Yes, you're right. But rather starting, perhaps changing the subject altogether. Ooh, look at the deer in the backyard. Aren't they cute? Or what are we having for lunch? Just changing the subject. Or perhaps just getting outward angry about it. And usually that follows up with saying, well, how about you? Like if someone tells you, oh, you're always late. Well, you are late too. So taking that as an opportunity not to reflect on our own conduct, but rather trying to drag the person who is pointing out our conduct in the mud with us. Or perhaps they are not guilty of guilty of our same behavior, but they do something else. And so we're like, okay, this is a great opportunity to talk about their kilesas and make it about them. So, which is another way to shift sort of the subject of the conversation. And harboring all this hatred and then having lots of resentment. So for weeks and months and etc. Actually, before my Buddhist practice, I used to remember I had really strong temperament. I mean, I guess I still do, but like comparatively speaking, it's nothing. But, I would be very vocal about my distress, or, just the whatever needs to be addressed. And I was pretty unskillful lots of times. Definitely, whenever I admonished before my Buddhist practice, I was definitely not following any of the recommendations of the Buddha, except for the fact that it was true. And that was the only thing that mattered to me. It was true. And like, you better like man up and like, get it together. I think I used the sexist term, man up. It's cultural conditioning, but you catch it, you know it. It's the first step. It's also difficult because English is my second language. Anyway, human up and deal with it. So perhaps I was very, strong, like I would shout, etc. The person would get really upset, but I would forget. I would forget immediately, like after perhaps even like 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, depending on the gravity of the offense. And the other person, most likely than not, was pretty upset from the sort of interaction that we had. And they would remember after a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And I was like, wait, what happened again? So harboring that resentment. So resentment is not necessarily something that, the karmic conditions that I experienced in this life made present, but it is something that is very common. That either we're the recipients of resentment or we harbor resentment, or perhaps both. And it's interesting how the Buddha says, because eject this person, why should another's son vex you? And so actually, there was a little note in the sutta where the commentaries are a little bit confused, apparently, about this particular sentence, but I actually didn't find it confusing at all. And also because I remember the first thing when I was a little bit upset once in Thailand, when I was traveling as a monastic, upset not in the angry side, but rather in like the distressed, little bit weepy side. This older Thai lady came to me. She was a layperson, and she said, but someone translated for her, "You're the daughter of the Buddha. You have to be strong." And of course, I cried even more. It's a huge responsibility. So in that moment, I cried a lot, but it was actually such a profound teaching in of itself, and I really treasured it. There's actually also a precept when we take bhikkhuni ordination, where it's actually an offense if we start as bhikkhunis, going way about like in our distress and making scenes of being extremely upset. But anyway, that for another, that's a different topic. But point being, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that there is a huge responsibility when we start taking these robes and we become sons and daughters of the Buddha. We become his children. And we are children who represent the triple gem, something extremely powerful, important, precious, actually, as the word gem suggests. And it's so beautiful, that one of the things that really impressed me in meeting monastics was actually my observing my reaction towards monastics. It was this empty canvas all of a sudden. So normally when we meet people, in a second, we have a big bunch of prejudices arising in the mind. We're completely unaware of it. We're like, oh, there's this hat, and they're wearing this type of like clothing, so it means that they come from this sort of background, or their interests are this, or like, oh, I want to connect with this group of people that looks in this particular way, or this other group of people I don't really like hang out with, so I'm not going to talk to this person. But when you approach a monastic, you have zero idea. First of all, like, well, everybody wears the same thing, rags. And the other thing is, we don't have any hair. So even, some clues like the hairstyle, do they even care about their hair normally, or they don't care about their hair? What kind of, do they have a trendy haircut? Like, are they up and coming in, in the trends? Or, are they scruffy? Are they a little bit hippie? You don't have any of those clues. But all you have is this identifier, of someone who is committed to the practice. And it doesn't matter where they are coming from in what we think the social hierarchy is. All of that is erased immediately. So one of the recollections actually that the Buddha invites us to do as monastics is actually also that we are no longer part of the social hierarchy. This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. And so this is comes with, actually, it's incredibly freeing, but also has a lot of responsibility as well. Because we are representing the triple gems. So any action with body, speech, and mind that we do reflects on the Buddha. No different like, when I was a little kid and I would visit the village of my mom. If I would be naughty, actually, when I was a little kid, I was born with some pretty bad tendencies. Not fully, but I had this really bad tendency of stealing. So actually, when I would go in the village of my mom, if I had the opportunity and I would go to a shop, I would steal like stuff. And my mom at a certain point caught me and brought me to the store and got me to apologize, return all the merchandise, etc. But the reason that she was able to catch that was that there was this rumor that was spreading, and that reflected also poorly on her because she was not paying too much attention to the little girl. So it was reflecting on me as a person, but also on my mom and my family at large. So very important to reflect that as monastics. And also actually as Buddhists, if we see the history, like whenever Buddhists do really bad things, actually they always even ask me, I'm like, I was not even born in Asia. Like, oh, about those Buddhists that said those things in this particular country, and like they're doing that. And I'm like, I don't know what to say. I've never even been to that country. But it's important. It's important to reflect on our actions and the implications that they have. So the Buddha continues, "Hear, bhikkhus, so long as the bhikkhus do not see his offense, a certain person has the same manner of going forward and returning, of looking ahead and looking aside, of bending and stretching his limbs, and of wearing his robes and carrying his outer robe and bowl as the good bhikkhus." So the Buddha here is pointing out at the external appearance of a monk. And a lot of times, actually, we put so much emphasis on the outer appearance. But the Buddha is drawing a difference between, actually, in my opinion here, right mindfulness versus wrong mindfulness. So one can be perfectly mindful in terms of their movements and etc. But actually, it's wrong mindfulness if the mindfulness is not inspired by sila, by morality, by good virtue. It becomes just a nice display of movements, as we see here. And in fact, then the Buddha proceeds with, when, however, they see his offense, they know him as a corruption among ascetics, just chaff. Chaff? Is that chaff? Thank you. Miasel. Just chaff and trash among ascetics. Then they expel him. For what reason? So that he doesn't corrupt the good bhikkhus. So once again, this, difference or this tension between outer appearance and inner appearance. Does the outer appearance reflect something that has been developed in the mind, or is it just, a little dance that we do? A little showcase. Oh yeah, I'm like the good monk. Look how mindful I am. Look how perfect and cute I look. But then if I actually start doing so many different offenses, unwholesome actions, well, who cares if I mindfully walk in a room, right? The important thing is what we do, what types of actions we're doing. Are they for the benefit of ourselves and others? Are they bringing us closer to the path? And we put so much emphasis a lot of the time, on what a monk looks like. And sometimes we also create these imaginary stories on the ideal monk, the ideal enlightened being. I remember watching this video a while back of Ajahn Mahabua. He's a reputed enlightened master of last century in Thailand. So there were still actually videos on YouTube because he died at the end of like the 20th century, if I remember correctly. And in that video, he didn't look like an enlightened being. I was so shocked. And so the question arose in my mind, does he not look like an enlightened being, or does he not look like what I think an enlightened being should look like? And what does this enlightened being idea that I have in this mind appears? And actually, in that video in particular, he was complaining about the lay people. This is what I was perceiving. He was complaining about the lay people being noisy, etc. And I was like, oh, but no, but this enlightened being is supposed to be all like, peaceful and lovely and like da-da-da. Basically, I was picturing Queen Elizabeth. I don't know how Queen Elizabeth became sort of, like this ideal of what an enlightened being should look like, when I know that Queen Elizabeth, she's a cool lady, I like Queen Elizabeth, but she's not clearly an enlightened being. She also doesn't handle money, but she's not an enlightened being. I do believe she eats afternoon, though. But point being, where are we getting these ideas from? And also, where do we get these ideas that an enlightened being should speak in a certain manner or act in a certain manner? Sort of like a British aristocrat. I started laughing at myself, And so I started actually re-looking at that, rewatching that video, but with sort of new eyes. So having abandoned that delusion, having seen that delusion, abandoned it, seen it for what it was, and I was like, oh, actually, Ajahn Mahabua in that video is doing nothing different than what the Buddha is doing here. It's just that it's not like whatever, an American, like the, not sitcom, how do you call it? Like American show on Buddhism or spiritual practice or whatever, on, mindfulness 2.0 or today's special only $9.99 enlightenment kind of thing, right? So it's not that idea that we have of spiritual practice, but it's actually spiritual practice in action. So denouncing the unwholesome as unwholesome, that is the appropriate response. And treasuring the wholesome for the wholesome. And not engaging into an act of looking like a good spiritual practitioner, whether we have robes or not. But being fully committed to end suffering, fully committed to become pure in our minds, pure in our actions, just like the Buddha. And it's very important here where the Buddha says they expel him so that he doesn't corrupt the good bhikkhus. And, here there's so much that comes to mind, actually, because so many times we have this, the doormat syndrome in Buddhism, where we endure so many different things, and it's not based from the suttas. It's just based from our delusion, really, of misunderstanding. So that then we have to be, there's the beautiful simile of the saw, which is abused in so many different ways. And, in the simile of the saw, like the Buddha is suggesting how when someone is, like, even if they were cutting all our limbs, we should keep a mind of loving kindness. But the Buddha never says, now go out on the street and find someone who cuts all your limbs so then you can practice loving kindness. No, he says, if someone is trying to, cut you up into pieces, go the other way, leave. Don't enter there, voluntarily. But we just get a little bit confused sometimes. And so then we're like, oh, yes, I'm here. Please, everybody, walk on me over and over again, and I'll practice with a mind of loving kindness. But since we haven't done much progress in the path due to our delusion, we actually then have a mind full of hatred, of aversion. But we keep going there, and then actually we keep creating the same conditions in order for being abused. And that's bad karma. And we should remove those conditions from happening in the first place. We should not voluntarily go in the lion's den. I mean, if someone throws us in the lion den, then we try our best and we follow those teachings. Keeping a mind of loving kindness, etc. But we don't voluntarily get into the lion's den. And if we're there, we also tell the lion, you are doing something very unwholesome to be, taking my limbs. It's not a good thing that the lion is harming a sentient being. With the cat upstairs, our monastic cat Stan, when he tries to harm sentient beings, we don't go like, oh yeah, oh, sentient being, may you have a mind of loving kindness. And we go, Stan, stop. Stan, cat, stop. Stop doing what you're doing. A lot of times it works. Anyway, the Buddha proceeds. Suppose that when a field of barley is growing, some blighted barley would appear that would be just chaff and trash among the barley. As long as its head has not come forth, its roots would be just like those of the other crops, the good barley. Its stem would be just like that of the other crops, the good barley. Its leaves would just be like those of the other crops, the good barley. When, however, its head comes forth, they know it as blighted barley, just chaff and trash among the barley. Then they pull it up by the root and cast it out from the barley field. For what reason? So that it doesn't spoil the good barley. And so we see that here now the Buddha goes into, actually offers a lot of different similes of getting rid of something that is potentially dangerous for others. So many times we can actually, focus on that single person. Actually, I'm guilty of doing that as well in the history of this organization. A few times. Luckily, I learned fast. I'm a fast learner. But I was like, oh, poor person. This person, has all these like bad, awful views. We once had a white supremacist, for example, that came and started sharing really awful ideas. And we were like, oh, poor guy. Well, maybe we should like talk to him and make sure that like he's going to overcome his views. And also, poor guy doesn't have any other place to practice. And in the meanwhile, this only lasted for 2 hours, by the way, this particular episode. But other episodes, perhaps not as extreme as someone who is a white supremacist, have lasted though a few more hours or a few more days. And it was of much harm, actually, for other people who were around. So sometimes in order to, we put our efforts and intentions on something that is already like too much, too past, too late. It's like kind of at the expiration point, without thinking of the rest of the people. And so that's why the Buddha goes into these descriptions, these similes, very similar to, an apple, like a rotten apple. It perhaps is, something that happens to us more often. If we see a rotten apple in the fruit bowl, if we don't remove it immediately, sooner or later, all the other apples will rot as well. It's very evident, especially with the strawberries. The berries really pick it up very easily. So paying constant attention to that, because it is contagious. Wrong view is extremely contagious. And so we see actually when you start living in community, you start noticing how your actions influence others and how others' actions influence yourself. It's incredible. Which is why it's so much easier to practice this path in community. Well, in a good community. If you're in a community with a lot of rotten apples, then better alone than in bad company. We have a saying in Italian, but I'm not going to translate it. It's usually my translations are very weird sounding. But this Sudasa is telling me to do it anyway. But I'll restrain. But anyway, we'll see. I'll go with the other similes of the Buddha instead. And he says, so too as long as the bhikkhus do not see his offense, a certain person here has the same manner of going forward, all the way to carrying his outer robe and bowl as the good bhikkhus. When, however, they see his offense, they know him as a corruption among ascetics, just chaff and trash among ascetics. Then they expel him. For what reason? So that he doesn't corrupt the good bhikkhus. Suppose that when a large heap of grain is being winnowed, the grains that are firm and pithy from a pile on one side, and the wind blows the spoiled grains and chaff to another side, then the owners take a broom and sweep them even further away. For what reason? So that they don't spoil the good grain. So in other words, throw it out and make sure it's really, really far away. Sweep it out as far as possible, so it doesn't contaminate the whole rest, And we see actually in Burma these days, it's pretty like a good example of what we're talking about, of when we overlook certain terrible views. Right now there is an incredible, it's just so upsetting what is happening in Myanmar, and how awful the military is behaving towards its citizens. Heartbreaking. But then you see these monks, not all of them, of course, actually just a few. But it started, with 1, 2 monks, and now it's actually a big group of monks that are completely taken over by praise, honor, gain, and are getting all this support from the military, who is practicing this, or they think they're practicing this really corrupted form of the teachings. I was reading the other day how they're donating these massive statues to some of these temples from these monks in order to water down or compensate the incredible bad karma that they're making in killing and exterminating so many of the Burmese people. The amount of wrong view, and I'm thinking, wow, hell realms for eons. I can only have compassion for those people. They just are so deluded and so horrible. But you see how someone in the Saṅgha who takes these renunciant vows, and then if they don't watch their minds, they start getting intoxicated with praise, honor, gain. And it becomes something a little bit contagious. But then it's actually only the thing that is reported sometimes. I remember during the, a few years ago when the problem with the Rohingyas happened in Myanmar, which is actually what I was referring to when people were asking me questions. Well, why are Buddhists killing the Muslims in Myanmar? And why are Buddhist monks endorsing this? Well, it's not true that Buddhist monks were endorsing that. It was just a few rotten apples that unfortunately, by the way, they're also parajika because they were actively telling people to kill others. Ashin Viratu, I think is his name, was saying how the Rohingya were not actual humans, so it was not really bad karma to kill them, and actually he was encouraging killing the Rohingya. When you do that as a monastic, you're not a monastic anymore. So corruption among ascetics. Yet, perhaps it started with 1 person, 2 people, but because he wasn't expelled, then there were more. Not that many. The majority of the Saṅgha in Burma is made of really honest, committed practitioners. But what is reported about is the chaff. It's the trash. So it's very important to remove that from the Saṅgha as soon as we see that wrong view, not wait for it to escalate, not wait for these people to take power and make these unwholesome actions. And the Buddha continues, so too, as long as the bhikkhus do not see his offense, a certain person here has the same manner of going forward, all the way to carrying his outer robe and bowl as the others, the good bhikkhus. When, however, the bhikkhus see his offense, they know him as a corruption among ascetics, just chaff and trash among ascetics. Then they expel him. For what reason? So that he doesn't corrupt the good bhikkhus. Suppose a man needs a gutter for a well. He would take a sharp axe and enter the woods. He would strike a number of trees with the blade of his axe. When so struck, the firm and pithy trees would give off a dull sound. But those that are inwardly rotten, corrupt, and decayed would give off a hollow sound. The man would cut this tree down at its foot, cut off the crown, thoroughly clean it out, and use it as a gutter for a well. I love that the Buddha here uses the simile of a sharp axe. So not like, seeing gently if perhaps they'll bend or they'll get to a better state afterwards. No, just cut it off, cut it out. And so once again, we see the appropriate response, that there is a time where one needs to be really forceful and uncompromising. And then other times when one needs to be more accommodating. But when we're talking about really gross misconduct, there should be no cute, sweet, like whatever spiritual ideals that we have. We throw that with the trash. And the sutta continues, so too, because as long as the bhikkhus do not see his offense, a certain person here has the same manner of going forward and returning, of looking ahead and looking aside, of bending and stretching his limbs, of wearing his robes and carrying his outer robe and bowl as the good bhikkhus. When, however, the bhikkhus see his offense, they know him as a corruption among ascetics, just chaff and trash among ascetics. Then they expel him. For what reason? So that he doesn't corrupt the good bhikkhus. The Buddha tells us this over and over again with the hope that we will get it eventually. And then the sutta ends with a nice little poem. By living together with him, know him as an angry person with evil desires, a denigrator, obstinate and insolent, envious, miserly and deceptive. So the encouragement here is to really reflect, not tell ourselves stories about others, but really acknowledge what is in front of us. And if it's unwholesome, we should acknowledge it as unwholesome and bring it forward to the person who's doing the unwholesome action through body, speech, and mind. And if they are willing to change, then there is room for practice. If they're not, then we can't do anything about it. But we should know, we should not pretend that it's not happening. We should address it. And then the description of this person continues. He speaks to people just like an ascetic, addressing them with a calm voice, but secretly he does evil deeds, holds pernicious views, and lacks respect. I have to say that this is such an amusing verse for me because I've noticed so much how, for example, if I started speaking like this, how people would relate to me in a different way. So sometimes I do it actually from person to person. Sometimes it actually just comes naturally because I'm doing a lot of metta, but there's an entirely different connotation. And being a little bit street smart in Italy, we are raised very street smart. I have to say that I also, when I'm interacting with people, I can tell if someone is naturally speaking with a sweet voice or if they are intentionally speaking with a sweet voice. Which is a little bit, actually, I find it a bit psycho when people speak like that. And it makes me immediately suspicious. Whenever I hear a sweet voice that is not a sweet voice, like for example, my seminary preceptor, Venerable Panyavati, has an incredibly sweet voice. And an incredibly stern voice too. So it's never the same every single moment. It's very honest. So when she speaks sweetly, it's always out of compassion. It's not out of like, oh, now I am, here to pretend that I'm a spiritual practitioner. No, she is a spiritual practitioner. She is incredibly compassionate. She doesn't need to pretend. She doesn't need to fake a voice. So her voice is naturally modulated by her sentiments of caring towards others. But, she's exactly how the Buddha describes. So whenever she sees something that is not appropriate, not right, she'll address it, and pretty sternly, pretty directly. But conversely, you'll find, some people that keep on have the same sort of tone of voice in every single moment, regardless of the circumstances. And sometimes they say some really harsh things, actually, while having that sweet little voice. Very disconcerting for me, because the sweet voice is not a particularly strong Italian trait. Like, we're not conditioned, as I was sharing yesterday. But definitely, if we're saying something harsh, I mean, we put a lot of emphasis in saying something harsh. We don't like sugarcoat it. So when I first had that experience of someone saying something really harsh, but like with this sweet little voice, I was like, whoa. I didn't quite really understand. Were they trying to be nice or not? But, this kind of trait, I see that is very, very convincing, can be very convincing if we stay on the superficial side of things, if we don't look at the whole picture. So being very wary of that a calm voice is just a calm voice. But what is the calm voice? What can also kill calmly? One can also steal calmly. So that's not indicative of anything. And then this connotation of the secrecy, right? So secretly he does evil deeds, holds pernicious views. So obviously, if someone is making a lot of unwholesome actions, they all stem from wrong view of not understanding the consequences of their actions. And also, of course, from greed, hatred, and delusion. And lacks respect, someone self-centered. I had personally quite a few experiences with that, with these people with calm voices that then it's actually quite interesting having this body and being in charge of a Buddhist organization. So having a female body, you're constantly dealing with lots of male-bodied people who are still practitioners, but then will relate to you with a conceit of superiority, and will relate to you by doing lots of thinking that they know better, that they know more, just because they have a different appearance than yours. And they will use such a cute, sweet voice to say the most atrocious things. But it's so interesting, because whenever I address those things, I can't do the sweet voice when I address those things. I'm very direct. So when I've addressed those things in the past, then you see how, boom, that image all of a sudden breaks down. And I'm actually quite happy. I'm very clear. I see right through you. You can say all your oppressive things with the sweet voice. Ain't impressing me much. So the Buddha continues, though he's devious, a speaker of lies, you should know him as he truly is. Then you should all meet in harmony and firmly drive him away. It's important. I actually would like to share a little quote from the Buddha from another sutta, Anguttara Nikaya 7.70, where the Buddha actually talks about, also connected with respect, connected with harmony, how important it is. And the Buddha says, it is impossible that, actually it's not the Buddha, it's Sariputta, if I remember correctly, who says, it is impossible that a bhikkhu who lacks reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma and the Saṅgha, the training and concentration, could have reverence for heedfulness. The bhikkhu who lacks reverence for the teacher, the Dhamma and the Saṅgha, the training and concentration also lacks reverence for heedfulness. So actually, it's an entire sutta where all of these things are showed how they are interconnected with one another. So if one does not, like whenever they are showing, for example, disrespect for the training, it stems out of not treasuring the triple gem. And then, of course, that cannot have any repercussions. Their mindfulness is not right mindfulness. They can't develop right concentration. All of these elements of the path are interconnected. It's very, very important to always remember that. And when one does not show respect, the Buddha is actually quite adamant. He gives instructions to us monastics on how to relate both to other monastics and also to other lay people. When lay people don't show respect towards the monastics, the Buddha actually encourages us most over and over again in the suttas not to share the Dhamma, not to take alms, not to go to a family that is disrespectful through body, speech, and mind. So not engaging with people who are not respectful of the triple gem. And this is because, once again, it's not a personal thing. It's not about me. It's not about Bhante Sudaso. It's not about Bhante Sumano. It's not about Venerable Tangdai. Just talking about the monastics currently present in the room. It's not about the future Anagarika Drew who will be a monastic soon. It's not about us anymore, but it is about something larger. Whenever someone disrespects the Saṅgha, they disrespect the entire Saṅgha of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and also of lay women and laymen who have attained accomplishments in this path, attained levels of liberation, and then automatically, conversely, then they're disrespecting the Dhamma and the Buddha. But if we treasure Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅgha, then we're going to respect everything. We're going to respect Dhamma Vinaya. We're going to respect the trainings that are given to us. We're going to respect everything. It's all like a domino effect. And the Buddha continues with, get rid of the trash, remove the depraved fellows, sweep the chaff away, non-ascetics who think themselves ascetics. Just in case we hadn't understood. And the sutta ends with, having banished those of evil desires, of bad conduct and resort, dwell in communion, ever mindful, the pure with the pure, then in harmony alert, you will make an end of suffering. So that fundamentally in the end, actually not in the end, but we should immediately address these things once again and make sure that we are surrounded by people who encourage us in this, encourage the development of our most wholesome qualities in the path. As the Buddha said, Kalyanamitta, so spiritual friend, is the entire path. So we must make sure that we are surrounded by wholesome, honest practitioners. As monastics, for example, we are surrounded by people who are really committed to make an end of suffering, not to, find a job, so to speak, an unpaid job. It's always like so weird. But there are people who take this as a career path or something, have no idea what else to do in their life. So, all right, there's free room and board, I heard. Well, no, there isn't. So very, very important to treasure that in ourselves, but also make sure that we're surrounded by people who have the same motivation. And in that way, we can blend like milk and water. In that way, we can make an end of suffering by supporting each other out. All right, so that's all that comes to mind this morning.
Thank you, Ayya Soma, for sharing those words of Dhamma and your reflections with us. So at this time, if anyone has questions, feel free to type them into the live chat, and I will ask them to Ayya Soma. And welcome to all our other friends joining us, including Venerable Varapanyo as well.
Hello, Venerable.
Thanks for joining. And our friends on Instagram Live, including a fellow Italian who can relate to everything you were saying.
Great. I'm glad to hear there's a fellow Italian. We're like a rarity in Buddhism.
And let's see. Michael says, this is a powerful, provocative sutta. At first, it seems that the major offense was not accepting, considering, and reflecting upon the accusations, but later in the sutta, the offenses are the point.
Yeah, I mean, it's, once again, it's how we're relating to the offenses. So it's not that we have the expectation to enter monastic life and that we're all pure and perfect, or to enter the path as lay people, pure and perfect. Otherwise, there would be no path. We're all perfect and stainless, and there is nothing to practice. But rather, what is expected is a commitment to grow in this Dhamma and discipline. So a commitment to reflect on our actions, our honesty, and to be fundamentally, as the Buddha says, the heir of his Dhamma, not of his material goods. So once again, it's a lot of people can think of this as a privilege to wear these robes. Well, actually, it's a huge responsibility, as I like to say. It's a huge responsibility when you don't go to work and have a paid job, 9-to-5 job. It's a huge responsibility to be relying entirely on donations because you are in debt. That's how the Buddha talks about it. We're in debt until we actually attain a level of awakening. You know, like the people in this country with all these like racking student loans, it's us monastics. So it's not with a bank institution, but rather with like, what are we doing with our time? What are our intentions here? And it shouldn't be to be parasites of the good heart and of others, but rather really treasuring this support, this unique, incredible opportunity for practice and doing our best. The only way the Buddha says, we can repay the lay people is by working on our practice. So becoming better people mentally, then we are actually increasing the merit of the lay people.
And Venerable Varapanyo says, could it be said that there is no greater gift on the path than spiritual friendship, based on the sutta?
Is it a question? Or
I think both. Perhaps. Comments and questions.
Yeah, I would say yes, I definitely agree with that. It would be very difficult for me to practice without my spiritual friends, so I'm very grateful. Had it not been for Bhante Sudazo, it would probably not be in robes. Or it would have taken a very long time, maybe at the age of 60 or 70 or 80, I don't know. Or maybe in the next life, who knows? So I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity and the inspiration.
And Denise says, I had no images of what an awakened being looked like other than Buddha statues.
Sadhu, keep it that way.
Until
oops.
I saw a picture of Deepa Ma on the cover of a book about her life. I don't know whether she was enlightened or not, but that was the idea living in my head.
Great. Well, that's a nice ideal. Yeah.
And Michael says, when I'm corrected and after reflection, I feel that the admonishment is wrong, inappropriate, or untrue, I feel a strong urge to defend myself, to explain myself.
Well, so the process should be whenever someone is, bringing something to the table that is a criticism of ourselves. Well, first of all, to understand that we're human and we're unenlightened. So it always stings, no matter what, until we have a level of awakening, it stings to be corrected. Because we all, in one shape or form, want to be perfect. Even though we know we're not perfect, even though we know we're a mess, we all want to be perfect. Or we think we are. Or actually, it's not we think we are. We think that other people should think we are perfect and should work on their defilements, because clearly they are, not perfect. Hell is other people, as they say. So understanding that is a universal reaction of an unenlightened being. That's why, it's still relevant 2,500 years ago like it is today. We're not in ancient India, yet we have the same exact reactions. We're not special. So what we should do is take it as information that is shared with us, understand that we're going to have all sorts of emotional reactions, and maybe the appropriate response is to just shut up in that moment, like not saying, oh, you're right or you're wrong, but rather taking it as information, because in the heat of the moment, we're immediately going to go, you're wrong. You're an idiot. Shut up. Like whatever kind of sort of strong reaction we're going to have. So just take that information and then think about it. Start reflecting, work with it, and go, is it actually true that, for example, I tend to get angry and then I start saying a bunch of awful things when I'm angry? Let me think about it. Is that something that I should be looking at, watching for? And then we can see for ourselves after a while, after, as time goes by, also the sort of the effects of the punch, of what we perceive as a punch or as an offense, start fading away. So we start becoming also more objective and more comfortable. So taking it as a working hypothesis to look at our minds and see if there is some truth in what has been said. And if we see that there is some truth in what has been brought up to us, then we can make the necessary adjustments. If we think it's completely absurd, but after a while, not immediately, after a while, after a couple of days, if we think it's incorrect, then we just dismiss it. We're like, well, that's incorrect. That's not true. But, if there's lots of people, it's also a number games. So if there's a lot of people that are seeing the same exact issue, if everybody's telling you that you're angry and you think you're not angry, well, the odds are that maybe all those people are right. Maybe.
And a couple other comments. Melissa says, the truth can be done out of love skillfully, but sometimes not so skillfully and cause more suffering. Personally, I've had to remove myself from those who smoke and drink because it was not skillful enough to fall prey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. No, that's a clear example of, well, not necessarily you have to, remove the chaff, like as in every single situation. If it's just one, like bad apple, you throw the bad apple. But sometimes if you're actually entering a place that is unwholesome, you should remove yourself, throw yourself out. And really look constantly at your mind. Is your mind going towards the wholesome or towards the unwholesome in every single moment? Because also in spiritual circles, we might think that we're actually entering a safe space, but we can have a different experience. Or perhaps actually the spiritual community is completely fine, yet we, don't have a karmic affinity with the community. So actually our unwholesome qualities are increasing. As His Holiness the Karmapa said once when we went on retreat with him a few years ago, I remember he was saying, it doesn't matter, even if like you are in the presence of an incredible, like developed being, if your greed, hatred, and delusion in the presence of this enlightened being is increasing, you should remove yourself from that situation. Because the purpose of this practice is to decrease greed, hatred, and delusion. So we need to create the right optimal conditions for that to happen. So sometimes it can just be our bad karma. We have the bad karma of like becoming completely full of greed, hatred, and delusion while being in the presence of a very developed master. Well, then let's do something else. Let's find another, developed master. Or perhaps let's be let's find the right conditions that help our growth. And sometimes the right conditions aren't, what we had in mind. I thought I was going to be in the middle of the forest in Thailand. Well, it so happens that actually most of the forest was destroyed last century. So there you go. There's very little forest to begin with. And also with the bumps that happen on my body, well, that's not going to happen. And then, I was like, oh, well, I wanted to overcome my fear with tigers and lions, etc. Like I read in all the books. Well, now I have the lion of patriarchy, the terror of, misogyny. And I'm like, okay, actually, it's the same exact thing. But I'm in a place that is very supportive. It's the suburbs of like New Jersey. Would have ever thought completely the opposite of the forest in Thailand. Yet the conditions are very supportive for me moving forward. My wholesome qualities are increasing and my unwholesome qualities are decreasing. So it's all about kind of really assessing that in the mind. I'm far from being perfect, but I'm going in the right direction. If these things won't be in place anymore, then I will go somewhere else.
And Danilo says, currently I'm living apart from my family, but sometimes I have to visit them. What if your family isn't exactly a good community for practice?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't understand.
I'm living apart from my family, but sometimes I have to visit them. What if your family isn't exactly a good community to practice in?
Yeah, well, in monasteries, they have this saying, when you think you are enlightened, go and see your family. So, yeah, it's challenging, especially for some reason for us in the West. Because actually all the people that I know from the eastern part of the hemisphere are all looking forward to like seeing their families. But for some interesting circumstance in the West, we all have all these like trial and tribulations with our family. So yeah, you can't really pick your family now. You've picked it. Your karma has picked it when you were born. So too late for that. You can't control the consequences, but you can control the causes of your future, perhaps, family that you're going to pick. But point being is work with what you've got. So I would say that right now, the thing that you can work with is unconditional love. So don't want your family to be any different than what it is. Don't try to turn them into Buddhists if they're not Buddhists. Don't try to give them Dharma advice if it's unrequested. Just be present with them as much as you can. And yeah, if it becomes unbearable, when they are, nagging or saying unwholesome things, you can do the Mahasi method. It's very useful. It's like talking, hearing, aversion, hatred. So, yeah.
Thank you. And that was the last question. There were a couple comments, but we don't really have time, unfortunately. But thanks everyone for sharing, and lots of thank yous from Ro, Aura, Ramon, Jens, Michael, Melissa, and everyone else throughout the whole talk. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning for Sutta study. If you have any leftover questions or any other thoughts you'd like to ask, you can join us tonight at 7:30 p.m. for Monk Chat. There'll be a panel of 3 of the monks here offering some space and time for your questions related to Buddhism and Buddhist practice. So if you can join us then, please do. But we can end the morning with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And enjoy the rest of your day.